Psychotechnologies Live! Welcome to a very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have with us a guest, Andreas Gomez, who is a perfumer, a Qualia researcher, philosopher of the mind, neuroscience, neurotechnology, and how to make people feel better, which is, I think, a good direction for these things. Today, we're going to talk about exploring the higher dimensions of bliss, and later we're going to get to pragmatic solutions for extreme pain. So, Andreas, exploring the higher dimensions of bliss, I got to ask you a question. What is bliss?
Starting strong. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. I look forward to this conversation. So, and also apologies in advance if my internet starts to deteriorate at some point, but I think we're good for the time being. So, what is bliss is your question?
Yeah. What do you mean by bliss?
Yeah. So you see, right now, there's kind of a lot of concern about the so-called like meaning crisis. You know, people are saying like, okay, like we have destroyed our conventional sources of meaning, whether it's religion, society, family, and now we're kind of like in this meaning vacuum and like, okay, what's going on there? And also we have the trope of people saying, I don't care about pleasure, I care about meaning. You know, like it's fine if I feel a lot of pain, as long as I have meaning, I can endure it. Now, I'm going to be very contrarian here. And I would say that actually the reason why we like meaning is because it is pleasant. And it is actually a kind of like analgesic. It literally reduces the quality of discomfort that we experience in everyday life. It is kind of like you can visualize it as a little source of positive feelings that essentially keeps you going, almost kind of like a battery. So when I talk about bliss, and more generally the concept valence, valence is like a very important concept. I'll explain it in more detail. It's not like a shallow kind of like vapid, you know, like cocaine, like pleasure-seeking type of thing. It's on the contrary. I'm talking about kind of like the core of what makes life worth living. And, you know, I consider within, you know, the concept of bliss to include things such as hyper meaningful experiences. And in fact, I think that, yeah, if you actually analyze the phenomenology, you know, what is it like to have a hyper meaningful experience, you will in fact notice that it actually is composed of lots of moments of pleasure. It's just that it's a kind of like shared pleasure, or like pleasure in a kind of like social environment or social simulation in your mind. And essentially, I think, you know, this is kind of like one of the goals of the Qualia Research Institute is to understand what is bliss at the most fundamental level. And by that, I mean, what is it mathematically? What is it at the level of consciousness? And what is the shape of blissful experiences? And essentially, yeah, we have kind of like a whole mathematical theory of that. There's many ways to kind of like ground it in a way that is consumable by, I think, like a broader public. But ultimately, it is a quest to essentially do to consciousness what chemistry did to alchemy. Like realize like, hey guys, actually there are like field equations behind this, and there's a way of modeling it. And there are some states that are preferable than others. And in fact, you know, that's what we're always trying to do, whether we really realize it or not. We're trying to achieve a higher state of bliss.
So in short, you don't know.
Well, he's passionate about researching exactly where he's going.
Well,
right.
No,
that's the whole institute is designed to try to figure out the answer to this question.
Yes, we do have like some very leading ideas, I would say. Not confirmed yet, but we're in the process of sorting it out. So a very, very key concept is called the symmetry theory of valence, which was originally proposed by Michael Johnson, one of the co-founders of the organization. And essentially, you know, he postulated, valence. So valence is how good or bad an experience feels. Essentially, you know,
it's like order of magnitude or like effect size.
You could
like strength of the feeling, or
so like you can essentially put like we have an article called "The Logarithmic Scales of Pleasure and Pain," and it has kind of like this like schematic of where different experiences lie on the valence dimension. So let's say, schematically, valence goes from -10 to +10, where 0 is kind of like a perfectly neutral experience, where either there's no feeling or the feelings cancel each other out. Maybe you're happy, but also you have some kind of pain, and they kind of average out in a strange way that is
like
not really understood. Some ambivalence, yeah, exactly. And ambivalence actually, its meaning is actually both valence, right? Like ambivalence, ambivalent. Yeah.
Okay, so because you got like on both sides, and then now you're in the middle when you're ambivalent, and so you're saying like the valence is like how far off the center, essentially. Like what's the deviation in experience?
Exactly. So some examples, I mean, very clean examples of positive and negative valence. Let's say like very clean positive valence, you have things such as MDMA. If most people, over 80% of people, if they take MDMA for the first time, they have like a really positive experience. I mean, it's not everybody. There's some people who respond poorly to MDMA, but very high percentage of people, they will say something like, yeah, that was like in the top 5, most pleasant experiences of my life. Like that's a very common response to it. Another like very clean source of positive valence is, for example, the feeling that you get when you have a child. According to our survey, that was like rated as like really high up there, and like, yeah, people who've taken MDMA and also have had children, they say like, yeah, they're kind of similar. I mean, like actually would say like having a child is like even better. There's like a quality that is like absent on MDMA that is like still there on when you have a child.
So I had a child, and I like the experience. I'm having another one.
Wow. Yeah.
Just I'm addicted.
May I don't know. It doesn't seem like that addictive of an experience. Maybe because like serotonin is also part of it, and like it's not like a compulsive, like meth high or something like that. Like having a child, it's more balanced, holistic type of pleasant sensation.
Yeah, it was very holistic. Yeah, it felt really good, but it didn't feel like sharp or like sometimes when I'm like have like really good experiences, I get like blinders on and I'm just like very focused on the thing.
Yeah.
And it felt very like I'm in the world and of the world, and like now fake shit has just gotten real.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this moment. I went to a friend's wedding a couple months back. And there was this moment where he was standing sort of at the altar, and then he saw the bride, and just I saw him go like, I'm getting married, which, in the week leading up, he was kind of like, yeah, I'm getting married. But like in that moment, he like had a leap of like, oh, it's real in some way, that like something hadn't hit him yet, and then it really did hit him. And like, that's like what I'm thinking of as like a sudden like valence jump of like pure positive valence.
Yeah, no, for sure. So in one of the studies that we conducted, I mean, essentially we asked people to like name and describe in detail like the top 3 most pleasant experiences that they've had, and rate them, and also like compare them and describe like how different they, like how much better, let's say, the first one versus the second one was. And I mean, like among the top ones is like having a child, getting married, falling in love, having sex for the first time, but also MDMA and IV heroin. It's apparently pretty pleasant. I mean, not recommending it, but hey, like if you study valence scientifically, that's an important data point. And then also,
is heroin like the highest valence?
No. Having a child is better.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, according to people who've had both, they say having a child is better.
Okay.
Yeah, but there is one experience that, well, there's like 2 experiences that seem very comparable, or 3 depending on how you count, because 2 of them may be the same thing. But essentially, there's some special kinds of epileptic seizures, especially they involve the insula and the temporal cortex, that are just like overwhelmingly beautiful and like beyond human ability to comprehend. It's just how amazing they feel. Dostoevsky was somebody who suffered from those seizures, and he actually said Yeah, he has you can look it up. He has a quote saying that a few seconds of such a wonderful feeling is something he would trade for like 10 years of his life because it was just that good. They're just that good. That he feels like absolutely everything is perfect. He's like held by the hands of God. It's just beyond, beyond what you could imagine as like what perfection feels like.
Mhm.
And they don't last very long. Maybe they're like a 10-second or like a 30-second experience, but like they're just so profound, like it resets how you think about life. And then there's like another one, which is uh, these two. Maybe we can talk about them like two. I think of them as pretty similar, but it's like meditative cessations, which are like one of the things that are like really close to like enlightenment, where
Like
you're
jhanas?
no,
Are you referring to jhanas?
End of the jhana, the
yeah,
technical ninth jhana that is not very well talked about because it's hard to talk about.
yes, exactly. So the
Oh,
jhanas are
cessation.
yeah, exactly. Cessation, exactly. Jhanas are really up there, right? Like jhanas are like, let's say like 7 or 8 out of 10. Like they're really good. And there's levels to them. You can have like a weak jhana, a strong jhana, like a super deep jhana. There are the levels to it. But cessation and how you feel right after it is scored as even higher. It's just kind of like a full reset, and you feel completely clean afterwards. Is how people describe it. Like years of stress kind of gets offloaded in a few seconds. It's a very strange thing.
Mm.
And similarly, also a positive 5-MeO DMT experience tend to be also rated as like, okay, this is like single best experience of my life. Usually involving something like the feeling of union with God or union with the divine, everything being one, everything just being pure, clear, white light, all of those type cluster of experiences are kind of like in there. But essentially, if you get to the point where 5-MeO DMT actually causes like a cessation, or like, yeah, you do disappear for a moment, the moment after is the one that is rated as like, okay, yeah, that is the best.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. So let me see if I got this straight. You're essentially like rank ordering like pleasurable experiences.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And so you got like heroin, DMT, whatever,
Having a child.
and then having a child, and probably some other like real world ones, and then the meditative states like the jhanas and cessation,
Yep.
and things like that. Damn. So it's like you're like essentially comparing apples to oranges on a scale where that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And the claim is, I mean, like the overarching framework here is that yes, these are apples and oranges in a very deep sense, but they have this common latent trait of valence. And then like the question is like, is there anything that unifies them? Is there any feature of experience that is held the same across all of these beautiful states?
Oh,
How is childbirth like heroin and also like DMT?
Exactly. And we think there are actually some powerful features that are shared. In particular, there is this combination. So it's two ingredients, and they have to come together, which is A, high energy, and B, symmetry. And this is a very general conception of symmetry. It's not just like, oh, bilateral symmetry,
yeah. Okay. So what's symmetry for the non-math people, and then what are higher dimension? What is energy? I think.
Yeah. So symmetry, at the most fundamental level is invariance upon transformation. Like you do something to it and it looks the same. Like you take a sphere and you turn it in one direction, it looks the same. You turn it differently, it looks the same. For a mathematician or a physicist, symmetry is a very, very deep concept because you can derive a lot of like laws of physics just from symmetry, from ideas such as a shape looks the same no matter if you move it, if you translate, if you move it across space.
Mm-hmm.
Like that fact alone already entails a lot of physical properties. There's this thing, it's a rabbit hole, but it's called Noether's theorem that says that essentially for any given symmetry, there's going to be a corresponding preserved quantity. And so they're like these fascinating, like deep insights, like the fact that the laws of physics are preserved over time entails that momentum is preserved. There's like a preserved quantity.
Oh, yeah. So like there's an asteroid going through and then it rotates and now you're like, oh, well, this is a different thing. I have to study it again. And physicists are like, no, come down. This is called symmetry. It's just because it's rotated, it's still all the physical properties are still going to be the same. And you don't have to like keep
exactly. So yeah,
that seems useful.
If you introspect on any very pleasant sensation, any very pleasant experience, you will notice that there is a smoothness quality to it. So let's say, for example, a jhana, like, how you achieve a jhana, there's many formulas, but in general, you will find that you're trying to propagate kind of this smooth feeling across your energy body and essentially reducing any kind of imperfection, any kind of asymmetries, patterns of tension or knots. On a jhana, all that is gone. Actually, you can feel the energy flow without resistance. And once you're in a jhana, it's very obvious that like, hey, the causes of suffering on everyday life have to do with blockages and imperfections and asymmetries in the energy body. We just don't notice them because we're so used to them. But essentially, from a physicist point of view, the fact that your consciousness is smooth has very deep implications. It means that energy can travel without dissipating. For example, that like you become kind of like a more efficient space. Like if you have like a lot of imperfections, blockages, you're gonna need a lot more energy to do the same work because the energy is gonna dissipate kind of like through the cracks. If you
have a pipe that's smooth, then the water is just gonna flow straight. But if you have like all these things in the way, then it's gonna start creating turbulence and mess up itself. I just want to give one more. I just want to give an example, like for more people that like are not as experienced with the meditation. It seems like this idea or this symmetry would apply to like flow states in general. So if you're working and you're constantly getting interrupted, that feels terrible. But if you're working and like everything is like smooth and you're able to just go, even if there's like problems in the work or whatever, you're just tackling that, like that just feels amazing. You just get this like amazing high.
Absolutely. So like the feeling of flow, I would say, is intimately related with symmetry, and especially in how energy doesn't dissipate, right? Like you're not getting distracted, or as you say, the energy is not leaking. There's not these imperfections. And I would add also that like, it's not only like getting distracted, but also like the rhythm at which you're getting distracted. Because one thing is to get distracted reliably, like, okay, like every 20 minutes, I've got to do X. And like that's fine. You can kind of account for that and like tune it out.
That just moves into the flow. Like that itself becomes the flow.
Exactly. But if you're getting interrupted stochastic, just that random in these like unpleasant, noisy patterns, that can be very destabilizing.
Yeah, I get that like with like alarms, those always like unless the alarm's telling me something, it's part of the flow. If the alarm's just like there because somebody said it and forgot, it's like I don't know what's happening now. I've lost all sense of what's happening.
Yeah, so to tie all of this up, all of this feeds into, first of all, the big concept is what we call valence structuralism, is the idea that what makes the experience feel good or bad has to do with the structure, the shape of your consciousness. And then within it, the more specific claim is that the aspect of the shape that matters is its symmetry. And that, all of that came from Mike Johnson in Principa, Qualia, which I highly recommend reading. His kind of a book length, kind of like, I don't know, manifesto to kind of encourage people to think more about this along those lines.
All right, we'll put it in the description. But like let's give people a little bit of like a taste more of it.
Yeah.
But like not the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So okay, so you said consciousness taking shapes.
Yeah.
We like do that, but like we've done that just in general as like vague things, but I think you've done it in like no, this is like a triangle or maybe something a little more complex than that.
It is crazy. So it's very difficult to actually tell what shape your consciousness is. And there's a very
that's an interesting statement.
Yeah, but you can infer what shape your consciousness is. It's just you have to do it in an indirect way. Here's why. Because your consciousness is composed of many elements, but two very important ones is you have awareness, which is like automatic, involuntary. You just open your eyes and you're aware of your environment. And then you have attention, which is how you concentrate on different parts of your environment and start connecting the elements of it, so that you don't only see lines, but you see like squares. You see more complex, interrelated structures. And so awareness is automatic and inevitable. Attention is something that you can modulate at will. Now, the error that I think a lot of people make is to think that the shape of your consciousness is the shape of whatever you're paying attention to. Let's say you're paying attention to a triangle and you think like, yeah, you have become a triangle. But that's not quite right. Actually, the entirety of your consciousness includes the field of awareness that is within which the triangle is contained and that is pointing towards the triangle. So actually, if you're absorbed into triangle, let's say in a deep meditation, you're doing like some sacred geometry work or something like that, which we can talk about. You're just
really into triangles, yeah.
Or you're just, really into triangles. You're really, absorbed into an equilateral triangle. The shape of your consciousness is a more complicated thing than just a triangle, because it contains the field of awareness that is pointing to the triangle, and then how the triangle is reflecting the energy back from the field of awareness. So actually, the entire shape of your experience is kind of that dynamic system that contains the background and the foreground at the same time, and they're resonating with each other. And so when we describe shapes of consciousness at QRI, essentially we take into account also the field of awareness. Now, there are some special cases, again, on very high symmetry, on very high valence experiences, where it's easier to tell what the shape of your experience is, because your awareness and your attention can actually merge on like highly concentrated states of consciousness. They can kind of become one. So one example is kind of the feelings of infinity that you may get on LSD. Some people report like, oh, it felt like I was in a kaleidoscope. I was in a mirror room or something like that. Like if you put two mirrors parallel to each other, you get this infinite reflection effect. So when
interest pearls, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like in real, and those are like legitimate states of consciousness. They're real, they're very significant, they're very high valence. They're very blissful usually, and they're very intense. But the very amazing thing about them is that they can allow you to essentially tell what is the shape of your experience. Why? Because think of like a mirror room, precisely, right? Like if you're inside a mirror room, it actually looks like infinite, right? Like if you're like in a cube and all of the walls are like mirrors, right? Like you look everywhere and like kind of like goes endlessly. But objectively, actually it's just a cube, right? It is just a cube that just happens to have mirrors. Right. Likewise, when you're in one of those states of consciousness, like Indra's pearls or Indra's net, essentially you can just kind of take the surface of it and assume that it's reflecting. It has like some reflective property. And actually the shape of your consciousness would be that surface. And it's like actually a finite space. It looks infinite from the inside, but it's actually more like a standing wave pattern that creates the illusion of infinity.
That's tripping me out because you're like, it is infinite in the sense that they're all bouncing around each other, but it's finite in the sense that it's all contained within a thing.
Yeah.
I want to know if you can tell the shape of your consciousness right now. Because obviously you've done a lot of these meditative, you've like tried out. Obviously you're trying to quantify, how do we tell shapes of consciousness? Can you tell your consciousness right now?
Yeah, I mean, the main things so there's like some generic shapes. So for example, the author to look into is Stephen Lehar. In particular, also a good link to put it to this is a post on Qualia computing called Cartoon Epistemology, where it's kind of just an easy way of visualizing the work of Stephen Lehar, where he describes essentially the shape of your consciousness as being this diorama-like thing. Like, you look at the horizon and it looks like it's at infinity, right? But from a certain different point of view, you can think of the horizon as actually just a finite distance away from you in your simulation of how you're representing the world, but where like the perspective lines converge. So it creates the illusion that you're looking at a point at infinity, but actually it's just there. It's just like not actually that far from you, like the infinity of the sky.
It's like an optical illusion, kind
of. Yeah, exactly. The seamless infinity of your visual field is actually an optical illusion because it's actually a bounded like kind of bubble.
I feel sad about hearing this a little bit. I feel like you've taken something magical away.
Oh no!
But no, fair enough. We're about the truth here.
Yeah. I think you can regain the magic actually. But so there's that, which is kind of that is like the shape of the visual field. But then there's also other fields. So you have like the visual component, and that has a particular shape and geometry. Then you also have, so it's like six. There's like 6 realms of experience, as it were. So you have like the yeah. 6. So you have like the outer. So like you have the outer visual field, and then you have the inner visual field, the mind's eye, as it were. Mm-hmm. On psychedelics, they can merge. Like if you get to high enough energy, they can become one, and like the inner and the outer visual domain, they merge. But usually they're like separate, and you can tell like, okay, I'm imagining this or I'm seeing it. And
right, you can closed eye visuals versus open eye experience.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of like different domains with slightly different geometry as well. Then the second one is like the feel space, which is essentially the space of emotions and tactile feelings. And that one also has like an outer and an inner component. The outer is like the tactile kind of embodiment component, like actual sensory data. The inner is, the technical term would be kind of like a Fourier transform. It's kind of the frequencies of that. So it's not only like, okay, where it's located, but it's like how it's vibrating. And so, in our theory, emotions are actually patterns of vibration, and whether they're like consonant or dissonant with each other determines whether the emotion is positive or negative. And it's also something you can like explore very deeply on meditation, and recommend doing that. Like, I think like there's a whole path for jhanas that you can get there just by harmonizing the inner vibrations. And like, that's a whole kind of interesting path. And then the third one is the inner and outer auditory domain, which also has like a certain geometry that is very intimately related with the geometry of the spectrum. So there's like time and frequency components. And so essentially, when I describe a snapshot of experience, I think like it's essential to describe like those 6 domains and how they're related to each other. Because also one of the variables, I know it's
do they all touch each other?
Yeah, and they can either become.
I was really hoping you'd say no, it's not a triangle, it's a square. Now you're like, oh, there's like 6 fields, they're all different shapes, and they all interact with each other.
Yep. Yeah, they do.
That's a complicated shape.
I know. But here's the thing: like on very, very highly symmetrical configurations, like jhanas or 5-MeO DMT, they collapse into the same field. And so like, when people talk about God consciousness, they talk about like the clear light of the void or something like that. That's kind of like consciousness before it differentiates into, sound or touch or like feelings.
Non-dual almost.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The path of non-duality. All of that takes you to like very symmetrical configurations where the fields are actually not differentiated. You don't have these like six realms of experience. But then there's like some kind of like, in everyday life, I would say they're like fairly separated. Like sometimes they get coupled together, but like they're fairly dissociable. And then there's like the space of like, let's say like LSD and DMT, kind of like in that range, which is pretty broad, where there's like a lot of interconnections, additional interconnections. So for example, you may have like very strong couplings between audio hallucinations and visual sensations that are like very unusual and not common on everyday life, but that are not yet sufficiently symmetrical to become pure consciousness. So they're kind of like, there's kind of an intermediate layer of like very strange, like highly interconnected mixtures of these realms.
Synesthesia would be something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, exactly. Synesthetic experiences would be kind of in that. So we have kind of like, normal everyday life, which has a level of interconnection. You have that layer, which is the psychedelic kind of level. And then you have the upper one, which is actually so interconnected, they actually merge and they become one field. And of course, most of the best experiences are actually way up there. Like that's where, bliss and peace and feeling of union with God and all of that is like way
That's
up
like
there.
That's like the higher dimensions of bliss is what you would describe.
Yes.
That.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you say to someone who isn't in your field and is like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you say God? Like, how do you I do a lot of meditation. I know what you mean, but how do you explain this to someone who's like, well, I've never seen God. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, like, there are many conceptions of God. I mean, like, like I guess like the religions that are popular tend to think of God as a creator, as kind of like a supervisor, or as a giver of the moral law or something like that, prescriber. When I'm talking about God here, I'm talking about it just from a phenomenological perspective, which is what it feels like for essentially the aspects of experience to collapse into just, let's say, one point or one flavor, one light, one clear light. And that's like it's undeniable. You can reproduce it in a lab if you want. You give somebody 5-MeO DMT on the most materialistic lab you could imagine. They will talk about like, yeah, that was God. that felt like we're all one. I'm not actually saying that you literally become one with the rest of the universe. It's more like you're dissolving the internal boundaries so that the illusion that you create where some aspects of your experience are other than you and some aspects of your experience are part of you, that falls away. And so like you can't sense something without kind of immediately realizing, oh, that's also me. Like that happens on those states of consciousness. And in that sense, all the non-dual traditions are also about that, right? Like that it's almost kind of like there's like a thick layer of fog that is usually present in our experience that creates this separation where like we label some aspects of our experience as not me and some aspects of our experience as me. I would say that, all of these kind of like God consciousness experiences is when that fog lifts and you notice or realize that like actually everything you experience is part of you, whether you realize it or not. It doesn't, again, literally mean that you're actually merging with like a higher entity or some, the universe.
Yeah, we're not talking from like a physics perspective. We're talking from like a internal experience perspective.
Yeah. And from that point of view, I think it's an undeniable reality, and it can absolutely be studied by science. It's not like, outside the purview of science. A very important component to this is the representations that we have of self and other with other entities. So, there's kind of like the spectrum of, let's say, like me, the feeling of being me, and then like the feeling of being familiar with somebody, let's say your brother or your mom or something. So that would be kind of slightly separated from you, but there's still some kind of like intermingling in your sense of self with them. Then let's say like friends, then strangers, and then like, people you may even like feel alienated from. That's kind of like in the opposite extreme of like, okay, that's like definitely not me. So that
like enemies are not like the extreme version of not you.
Enemies, and there's probably even more alien that they're not like, maybe they're like threats, but that they're like an enemy maybe to some extent is somebody you can at least relate to on the sense of like sharing goals with them, being a competitor sort of thing. But there's like an even stranger feeling of like, no, that's like so alien. It doesn't even have like my same goals in any way. And like you can feel a profound sense of alienation. So that would become the extreme opposite. So what happens in kind of these like God consciousness experiences is that axis completely collapses towards the feeling of like meanness. Like everything gets represented with a feeling of like, yeah, actually this is just me. There's a sensation of extreme intimacy with your experience.
I've had that. I've had that where like I'm like, oh, like I'm experiencing aliens, like from other dimensions that have nothing to do with me. And then also like when I shift perspectives into like the God perspective, it seems like, no, but we're actually all one and we're all coordinating in this way that, you know, moves beyond causality.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like, yeah, you've had some of these taste of these experiences. Yep.
Yeah, I had that with meditation, even not with drugs.
Oh, wow. Nice. And so, I mean, a key insight from QRI here is that it is not that oneness is inherently, you know, like good. I mean, I think there's a lot of good side effects of like oneness experiences. But it's not that you know, goodness itself is contained in them. Is something stranger. It's more that like the shape of your consciousness when your identity is merged with the universe is actually a more symmetrical configuration.
Yeah. Everybody should work like this is, oh sorry, you're getting me off now. Like this is, you're essentially like describing like kind of God in a way. And I don't mean it like the old man in the sky or I know physics things, but like you're essentially doing God, and like I think everybody should be like religious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's, you know,
and I don't mean following a book. I mean like the symmetrical experiences that lead you to the God consciousness and the oneness with everything.
Exactly. I mean, like there's the you know, like is a pack of molecules, sorry, is a mystical experience a pack of molecules, or is a pack of molecules a mystical experience? Well, there are two sides of the same coin, right? I do think it makes a lot of sense for us to hold some states of consciousness as like sacred. It's like, wow, these are like kind of like meaning giving. They're blissful, they're beautiful, loving, and they provide an anchor that destroys nihilism. You know, when you experience
or creates
that kind of,
it, I think if it does it badly, like if you do it in a weird way,
yeah,
you get this like symmetrical, like everything is terrible and the world, everything is bad and the world is terrible.
That would be a failure mode. And I guess like that is also very important to put out, which is that in our model, essentially the best experiences are like extremely filled with symmetry. And the worst experiences are filled with quasi-symmetry, which is like it almost clicks but doesn't. And so actually, like, yes, you know, they're not that different. And actually, like the completely neutral experiences are neither symmetrical nor quasi-symmetrical. They're just asymmetrical. They're like, for example, white noise. Like it just doesn't have any pattern in it.
Okay, you said something
and
else.
That's like the baseline of valence is like that.
Yeah, of completely neutral, not even mixed valence, not even
No
like, oh, it has
meaning.
good. Yeah, just no meaning, no pleasure, no pain.
So you said earlier the phrase hyper meaningful.
Yeah.
And this is like these experiences show up for us as hyper meaningful. What's happening in trauma or in suffering type experiences? Is it that they're hyper meaningful, but then they get locked up in like time slows down? I'm in the car accident. I see myself flying through the air and then I black out. And then those hyper meaningful moments get locked into my psyche and no longer accessible to me in terms of, is that what's going on? Like
that sounds like one of the kinds of trauma, like yeah, losing access to hyper meaningful states of consciousness for sure. But more, you know, the kind of like the 10,000-foot view of okay, what is trauma? Essentially would be like a dissonance disorder. You essentially like created a pattern in your nervous system that reliably produces dissonance, and that is blocking your capacity to experience, you know, full body consonance.
Mm.
There's many ways this can happen, whether it's like physical trauma or psychological trauma. We think that, like, at its core, like, sure, there's like a lot of, social explanations, biochemical explanations, but at its core, it means that whenever you try to access a state of consonance, it essentially deviates towards a very dissonant configuration. And, counterintuitively, the way we think the most effective way to treat these is actually through a process of what we call annealing, which is you raise the energy parameter, and I can explain again, explain what that is, in such a way that you melt actually these dissonances, and you let the entire nervous system cool down in a way that gives it access again to the consonant, full body positive states. By energy or temperature, I think you had asked that question and I didn't address it, is essentially if you add up all of the intensity of every part of your experience, we were talking about the 6 realms of experience, each of them has a degree of intensity on a given point in time. So let's say on the visual, outer visual domain, you think of it as like adding every pixel of your visual field, adding the intensity of that pixel. That will give you kind of like a score for like how bright all of your visual field is.
So that's heat. It's like, okay. It's like how intense is each particle.
It's total energy on the visual field, and then you do that for each field, right?
Exactly.
Like how loud is the sound, and how much touch sensation is currently entering you and irritating you?
Yeah. So let's say somebody, I mean, it's very typical, somebody, DMT experiences. This is just a very good example because as a function of the dose, it modulates the energy, like very reliably. Like if you take 10 milligrams, it will take you to some energy level. If you take 20, you will get to a much higher energy level. And, some person might say like, well, I didn't have a very visual experience, so what's up with that? Well, if it actually had an effect on them, maybe the energy wasn't on the visual domain. Maybe the energy was in the inner feeling domain, let's say like the emotional domain, or on the tactile domain, or the auditory domain. The point is that it doesn't matter how the energy manifests, the total energy of your state still reaches that level. And so there's this concept of within an energy level, you have kind of what.
You just lost your audio. Oh, no, it's back now. And he's
he was saying his internet. This is so interesting because do you know if this corresponds to the 6 domains, if this corresponds to anything in like Buddhism?
Yeah, for sure. Buddhism has the 6 sense doors. Absolutely. The like proposal is that your visual consciousness is different to your auditory consciousness is different to, and that's why mental noting is interesting.
Right, that's the Shinzen Yang stuff. Is like
right. Shinzen Yang,
feeling, and then they do internal, external, and like that's their path.
So it seems like what's going on is when you note, you're switching from one sense door. Like I'm in my visual field, I notice a visual moment, and then suddenly I'm hearing my voice. And in our normal everyday experience, we have this mush together thing. But the proposal from Buddhism is we're flickering moment to moment between them. And so then as I note, there's this experience of being a being made of visual, like reality is all visual, and then suddenly dropping out of visual land and popping back up into auditory land as I hear the voice, and then dropping back out of that one into
into tactile, like into
tactile,
inner feeling, because you're speaking it.
Right.
And so all these things are starting to resonate with each other.
I feel the vibration in my vocal cords, and so it's a tactile version of the same thing. But it's a tactile experience, not an auditory experience. And so mental noting, when you drop out of one consciousness into the next and you notice the flickering from consciousness to consciousness, you start having insight experiences, or no one really has an explanation for this, but it's an insight practice. You start having insight experiences when you...
Well, this is what he's explaining it as. He's explaining it as, well, because you're creating resonance with each other. Like you're saying, like, I think the thing you're saying is insight is like the transition from one state to the other. So if you like if you speak and then you hear and you're like, oh, I spoke and I heard, or like I heard and like what I heard inside my head is now connected to my body, which is connected to now my external hearing because I just spoke it. And so you're creating, like essentially like whatever energies are passing through you are getting experienced on all these levels. And so all your experience starts resonating with itself. And that's
this is
symmetry that we said.
a lot of meditative paths talk about unification that we merge into, like, instead of like me being a body that carries around the visual or the auditory or the tactile, or I start unifying that into one being experiencing things. And this is like, if you take a therapy method like internal family systems, you may be doing parts work with, well, I want to go for a walk, but also for some reason I want to sit on the couch. Like there's two of me that are kind of not unified. And
right.
They battle for control.
Right.
And so in that
my God, yeah.
We're going to bring them together. We're going to unify the consciousness into a symmetrical, they agree with each other on either side. This one's like, yeah, we feel like a walk now, let's do that. And the other one's like, yeah, let's feel like lying on the couch, let's do that. And so there's because there's agreement, there's a symmetry.
Yeah. There's a dissonance, and then like dissociation would be like also like a different kind of dissonance, and like disharmony, and probably like all the, I would imagine, and like bipolar would be like you're unharmonious with yourself over time.
Well, I mean, maybe this is a question for Andres. Like, what is the shape of consciousness when you're having a dissociation moment? Like, what does he think is going on when we are like, what a weird word, dissociate.
I mean, we could go more technical now that we're back.
Andres, do you have an answer for that one?
Wait, how are you doing? Can we check in? Yeah. Is your camera working or no?
With bad internet, maybe it's better off on voice only for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, probably. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right.
Buddy, but we're with you.
Where are you at? Where's your consciousness relative to the experience of the Psychotechnologies live episode that we are currently?
I'm excited, really happy to be here. Just frustrated my internet just to crap out in
and I think this is a great example of like the disharmony where we were all in like this like intense flow state with each other of like intense realizations, insights, and like it felt like everything was like being pulled in, and then like boom, that connection just gets kind of, now I can't see or hear. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe you could describe it or whatever.
Everybody started using Zoom.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think it cut out again.
Yep, he's gone.
Yeah.
So exciting.
This is why we need to be plugged into the internet at all times so that this doesn't happen.
I feel like that would make it worse. When we're plugged into the internet, then this happens. We'll just feel like traumatized every moment we get a disconnect.
Yeah, but if we're just like,
you know what he said about like quasi-symmetrical states?
You know what we need? Actually, we need like when we get to the cool, you're right. Yeah, that would be getting plugged into that would be a quasi-symmetrical. But like, just let me take this dystopian idea further. Okay. So we would have the internet, but then when your internet goes down, you got like GPT, like just like filling in what they think the blanks are, so that it doesn't like kill your experience.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean that's like that sounds like a like not like a symmetry, but like an almost symmetry in that sense.
Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable about these quasi dystopians. I'm not sure if we have you strong enough. Go ahead, Andres.
Yeah, I was going to say that 2020 lockdown, I think, were a Valence tragedy, precisely because people had.
Nope. He's not staying. I mean, 2020 lockdowns are a Valence tragedy because suddenly everyone was alone or something, probably.
Yeah, dude. The COVID stuff for me actually, like within the meditations perspective, like worked out. Like I had a lot of time to like meditate and figure this stuff out.
Mm.
And, like nobody would hang out with me, so I never got like distracted.
Yeah, interesting.
I was just saying, yeah, the 2020 lockdown, I think was a strategy.
Yeah,
Hard to understand you. You're coming across a bit garbled.
I think Andres is about to give up on his internet, but we completely understand because it's out of our control. So we just got to appreciate the universe as it is.
God works in mysterious ways. You know what? I do think that line "God works in mysterious ways" works well within this context, right? Let's say not God, but like God consciousness works in mysterious ways, because like then everything has meaning, but it's not like you don't get kicked out of flow as often because everything is already mysterious.
Well, I suspect that statement is actually a bridge. In this moment where Andres dropped, we're feeling disconnected from him, that could be like a quasi symmetry, right? But if I apply the salve, the magical psyche band-aid of God works in mysterious ways, then instead of feeling the negative of like the disconnect, I feel this positive of God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
We'll see it come. We'll see it turn good later, as a like, there's the Chinese proverb of like, we'll see, so it seems, sort of one of those. You're having such a lucky time. Well, so it seems. Yes, the one with the horse and the king and
we did that on stream already.
Right, which I suspect these statements are doing is they're helping us to bridge the symmetry in ways that otherwise we were non-symmetrical. We were stuck with, well, bad stuff happens, and that's a real big hole of meaning.
I think they are helping you bridge it from like the inside your consciousness perspective. You're like, oh, now I got all these bridges and like ways of crisscrossing my consciousness. But there's, which are essentially just like platitudes, right? But
unless you really feel them, in which case they're kind of more than platitudes. They're like,
well, I think that's the thing with platitudes is like they're extremely meaningful and extremely meaningless. And
right.
Like somehow they do both at the same time. The like if your like awareness is always with the shape of your consciousness versus like the consciousness, like I guess the consciousness per se, or like the what's inside it, like be the ocean, don't be the waves, then your experience never really changes no matter what happens, because you're like, it's the shape is still the same, it's just there's different stuff in it moving differently now. And I think like when you get really connected to God, like you walk with God and you're close with God and you are God, like everything is fine all the time.
It does seem like, I mean, this is the progression down the spiritual path. I progress to a like, I'm having a good time all the time place. Like, I want that one. Like, can recommend.
Yeah. So like, what am I trying to say? Like, if you want to feel good all the time, then like be religious.
Or spiritual or mystical.
Whatever this thing is. I'm just using the words that we already have.
Or maybe like passionate in reality, like passionate about reality, passionate about the bits that you love. Like if the question is like, I
think it's deeper than passion.
Andres was like, he didn't quite use these words, but I was like, oh, you take the person who's like, I don't know, I've never met God. And you say, okay, can you think of a time you had a peak experience? Right, and you take that person.
This is a psychotech.
As the psychotech, right? God. Because I was kind of thinking about this as he was talking as well. Like you say to that person, think of a peak experience you had, and then you say, okay, now go back to that moment. Like we were talking to AJ in an episode or two ago, and he was like, the moment that shame suddenly fell away for the first time. So like I've lived in this bubble of shame existence. This, Stephen Lehar's bubble thing. I've lived in this and it's always been shame. And then suddenly for a moment it wasn't. right? And we stopped on AJ and we asked him a couple questions. We're like, go back there. What was it like? Let's revisit that peak meaning making experience, hopefully for like maybe the qualities of symmetry that it had. And that's like, why was that good? Like, why don't you have more of that all the time? Like, let's grab the harness of the Kensho moment and like amplify it to your full experience so you can permanently be in that amazing, awesome place, right?
Right.
It's kind of like, that's a psychotech of like, try this.
Yeah.
Because everyone's had peak experience. Some people have had theoretically higher peaks than others, right?
We should do this as like a class of psychotext. Like, how do you, like, yeah, this would be an awesome class of psychotext, like connecting to God.
Well, my sense is we're doing the heating upside
realizing God or something,
right? We're doing the heating upside of the annealing. We're like, let's like take your present moment and let's invite that peak moment into this present. Like, can you feel it really strongly right now? Can we amplify that in your experience? Like, what's it like to feel the vividness of you just won the race, or like you just won the lottery, whatever that moment was for you that was the peak. Oh my God, I just won the lottery, right?
Right, like
we're shooting up the heating side of the annealing, and then
there's like a lot more energy in the system now.
I wish we still had Andres because I want to ask him questions because I am confused about how you do the downside in like the healthy way, right? Because the only way I know is like you stop, you do nothing for a while, and then you like float back down, or the other one in my head is like ice baths, like literally. But that's if we are annealing.
But why do you have to come back down even? I mean, like I think there is these natural ups and downs and that happen, but I don't think you need to force it down. Like, I think things cool off over time.
Yes.
And that's number one. And number two, even if they don't, then you're just in a high energy state. Like, that's just how you're
right.
Live.
So high energy is not necessarily bad, other than it's kind of like tiring. Where like I'm like all buzzed out. Everything's
the tiringness is the downness. So you shouldn't be tired and high. And like you're not high, and if you're high energy and tired at the same time, then you're non-symmetrical.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess I'm thinking of the like, from my experience of high energy states, there's this moment of like, something like I'm burning very hot. Like everything is, I'm not tired, but I'm burning very hot. But there's some sense of I'm running out of energy as well. But some of them don't have that. But in that sense, going up means coming back down later in the energy.
Yeah, so there's probably, like, we haven't gotten there yet, but I would guess there's a symmetry over time as well.
Right. Like, if you go up, you'll have to come back down. Or coming back down is
no. I mean, like, yeah, but like that's not what I'm talking about. The symmetry over time of like the ups and down, but that's still like the energy's still going through. It's just like, I don't know, where we're saying like more energy, less energy, but there's probably like a better way of describing that keeps the state symmetrical while recognizing this, right? Like if you're having like a balloon that like expands and contracts or something, I don't know.
I guess I'm thinking of like as maybe an example where the states aren't symmetrical. Your entrepreneur, like when they make their first 10,000 and they're like, oh no, I don't have 100,000. And then they make 100,000. They're like, oh no, I don't have 1,000,000. Then they make 1,000,000. They're like, oh no, I'm not 100 millionaire, right? It's a state that as soon as you get there, you lose it. Like it's not meaningful anymore. And that's like a forever Sisyphus, right? It's keep pushing that rock back up the hill. Like, whereas what we're trying to find is more symmetrical states, like
he who is rich, he was happy with what he has,
right? And they're like you go up and then you come back down to like happy as you are.
Yeah. See, I just quoted from a religion, like it's like a religious text.
I'm not against religions. It's just the like.
I think this might be what they're talking about.
That's
like,
that's Andres' proposal, right? That they're talking about symmetries, or they're finding language.
Well, he didn't say that. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but this is my extrapolation.
Yeah,
from what he said. But I think there's more. Like, I think there's more to what's going on because we still haven't gotten to like the objective reality of things. So like you have conscious states and like you're describing this and then this is experience, but also there's stuff outside your experience that does things that then affect your experience. And so you still want to be in flow with that as well, which I think is like the, capital G God.
Right. You still exist in a world where stuff happens. You still got to eat.
Right, like, because like you can be symmetrical and like live an awesome life and then get eaten by a tiger, and like that's not like that might be internally symmetrical, where you're just blissed out all the time and not doing anything
Until you're
like that's wireheading.
while you're tiger food as well. Maybe that tiger's having a really blissful meal, but then you're no longer really consciously experiencing it because you got to eat it.
Yeah, but you're getting eaten, and like I don't know. For me, like that triggers me out of the symmetrical experience. I'm like, dude, fuck bliss. I'm not getting eaten by a tiger. Like
Right.
that's my number one priority.
Mm.
I mean, not, whatever. But yeah. So I would like to see like there's got to be like some, and I would imagine like trauma is like you've resonated with a part of reality, in a way that gets stuck. And let's say outside reality, in a way that's gotten stuck. And then your shape can't resonate anymore. And so like when you're bringing all that energy, you're like, okay, like you're, this is therapy, right? Like when you're saying, okay, like I acknowledge something happened to you and we're going to like be there with that experience. And so like it gets very intense, and you have people around you to hold that container, which is, let's say your therapist and your support network.
Mm.
And you're kind of like, hey, I need all this attention, I need all this energy pointed at me to like help me and create that container. And then you can take like whatever that piece of reality is and like reshape it and be like, oh, it's not that I'm unlovable, it's that this person something, whatever other stories you're gonna have. And then those stories,
you can use the line like hurt people. So
sure, yeah.
This person hurt me because they were hurting.
Yeah, or shit happens or whatever. Like there's a lot of stories we create around these these intense experiences that we have. And so when when you're doing the therapy and you're like really like putting all that energy there, I guess like you're heating it up so it's more malleable, so that it can be in a shape that's resonant with you, like you as your consciousness, and then resonant with you and then resonant with the outside reality, so that you can continue to survive. And you can also learn from the experience.
Well, here's like an open question that I'll say for next time we have Andres on, is like if you have a locally symmetric, like an experience around, like me as the experiencer, I'm kind of attached to my body. I don't really leave it so easily. But if I have a locally symmetric moment, right, but it doesn't
like,
extend,
like the perfect souffle.
Yeah, or even just like I'm meditating and it's in my room and it's quiet and it's perfect and it's very peaceful, right?
Okay, so you have this. Like,
I'm locally symmetric, but I'm not extending to even the world outside my room, let alone the world outside my house, the world outside my city. Like I'm locally symmetric, and I'm curious about like, are we looking for like more globally symmetric states? Is that like is there a propagation of consciousness to more symmetric states globally? Is that one thing we're trying to do?
I think a healthy consciousness would want to do that.
Right.
I think this happens to people with like addiction and stuff, where I'm just sort of like
right,
talking here just because I'm like knowing the vibes. I might decide this is all dumb later, but which I always have the right to do. Keeping my
symmetry here. Yep.
But I think like addiction or something like that, or like fixation, OCD, things like that, where you're kind of trying to push the same button over and over again. It's like you may have had a moment that was like perfect or almost perfect or perceptually perfect, and you're like, yeah, that felt good. Everything was in symmetry at that point. And then you're trying to recreate that experience, but like it's hard to get enough of something that's almost works. So you have this thing, you think it works and it almost works, and then you just keep doing it over and over again. And I think like we're all like, I think something to realize is that we're all trying to create this super symmetry, this symmetry of everything all the time.
Right. I got a question for you. What was your most symmetrical experience?
Dude,
can you describe it?
I had the opposite one. I think for me,
least symmetrical.
The main formative is like, it's like the lowest valence possible.
Ooh, okay.
And that's the one that's like when he's talking about like snapshots of experience. like that's the one that I always come back to, and like that's like my template. Where I'm like, whatever leads me here is wrong. Period. End of story. And so like it kind of just like it's kind of like cut out most of reality. Like sorry, not most of reality, most possibility states. So I've only got this like narrow range of stuff that I do actually.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like something worth investigating. So I sit on the line, trees with branches that reach to heaven have roots that reach to hell, which is a quote from Carl Jung, who, you know, explored various different conceptualizations of trauma and shadow.
I've got my roots in hell, and now I'm building the branches to heaven.
Right.
You know, which itself is already like, even that shape and that structure is itself, you know, a certain shape that is prone to things.
Well, it's also got a symmetry to it, which is kind of interesting, right? We've got the down and the up, with like symmetry across valence as well, which I wish we had Andres to talk about.
It's so funny we're talking about this now. My kid's calling for me. Oh, come here. How can I not?
So you know, I had this experience that I just have big question marks around. I was on a Vipassana. I was in the middle of like a 10-day silent sitting meditation, and I was meditating, and all I can describe is that everything went white, including like my experience went to whiteness, and then everything, including me, ceased to exist, and then like a moment later or so came back, and I was like, what was that? And hearing him describe that high energy and like, you know, adding the sums of the pixels makes me wonder, like, did I stumble into something? I mean, obviously, Vipassana is a very strange container for meditating and that sort of thing. But it's like, what was
very body focused, right?
Well, no, everything disappeared. There was no body. There was no, I mean, in the moment, right? Everything rose to pure white and then like stopped. Like everything was white, including like there was no observer observed. There was just whiteness, and then it was gone. And then like, you know, everything came back a moment later, which was I didn't quite get the like the moment after. Like he's described the DMT thing where the moment after is the best moment ever. Didn't quite get it. Was nice, but the next moment was not particularly powerful. But I wonder if I just missed it or something.
That might have, like, that white light might have been the moment
after.
You remember?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I take it as interesting. The possibility I've had. I mean, that's just one example of a very interesting state. Done plenty of different types of meditation that'll take me to interesting places. But I do wonder, like, how symmetrical was I in that moment? Very cute. Getting your bliss moments from your kid there.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, like, I think this stuff, like there should be, like, I haven't seen really people talk about this so much in regards to parenting, but like you're like in parenting, like you're constantly getting these up and downs. You know, like the valence is always flipping, right? Where they're happy, like he's so happy, and then he's like, oh my God, like,
right, you're about to put him to bed and he might not want to, and then he's gonna be crying, and then it's gonna be like,
yeah, oh my God, this is the worst. And then he goes in bed and he's like asleep 5 minutes later. And you know, like so like the valence is like for kids especially is like constantly up and down. And like a big part of, like, I think the parenting, like a big part of like doing the parenting well is it's not like exactly being neutral the whole time, but like, or immune to the valences, but it's like being stable. It's like I have a symmetry, and like this is how I am, and I'm, you know, like it's like almost, I guess from their perspective, it's like consistency. When people talk about parental consistency, I'm like, yeah, like this is my shape and this is what I do, and your shape is different than my shape, but our shapes are, you know, still resonate with each other. And like kind of just, and I guess like responsibility almost is like keeping your shape, or like keeping the integrity of your shape and like the important shapes around you, and like being irresponsible. Like he's pretty irresponsible, you know, he's 1.5, so like not that responsible, and so he's allowed to like do all these like huge variations over time. like just all the time, like whenever he wants. And like over time, they kind of slow down, and then he hits like growth stages, and they start to, and then like now it's bigger, right? So before he can go like 1 to 2, and now, or like 0 to 2, and now it's like 0 to 3, 0 to 4. And so there's much more variation, which is like destabilizing to him over time, is destabilizing to him at every stage of development. And like my job is to be like, I acknowledge the destabilization, I acknowledge all these things are happening, and also like I'm still being stable without like freaking out. So it's like being able to connect and intimate and share with him without getting caught up in all his stories as well. Because otherwise it's just two children that cry, screaming. And and then I'm the one that kind of has to worry about the tigers.
Well, I mean, that's your job. You're the parent.
Yeah, no, I don't expect them to. Yeah, that's my job. And like the tigers will get you when you least expect it, right? So you have to always be expecting it.
I want to go back to like, we're trying to psychotech. Like, how do we practice what Andres is describing a bit better?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we talked about I guess like the sort of just like on a what feels very mundane now, of the 6 realms of experience.
So
that's like Shinzen
makes sense to us. Yeah.
So if you guys are into that, Shinzen Young is the person to Google, and he's got like a whole program that they do. I think it's pretty much like they start with noting, which is you're noticing and you're saying every time you hear something or see something or feel something. And so you go hearing, seeing, feeling. And I guess it's like internal I think maybe they do then internal, external.
Right. So there's see in and see out, and hear and hear, hear out, and feel in and feel out.
Is the words they use.
Trying to look for like very compact words that just simply describe sort of the direction, the consciousness, so the visual consciousness being seen, and just like let you like annotate. Like there's some quality of knowing that we apply to our experience when I'm like, I know I'm seeing things right now, and then like drop it again so that we can be ready to observe the next mind moment in perceptual experience.
Right. So you do. So part of, like I'm saying, like for the beginning, that's like part of it is noticing it, and then the experience itself tends to like dissipate more quickly once you've noticed it. And you're noting, and then you go from noting to like outside to inside, and then I think you go just like seeing or something. Like you just it becomes like a clicking. For me, it's like there's like this clicking that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I want to maybe bring in the stages of insight. We talked about this a while ago. So one of the qualities. So there's the dichotomy of major types of meditative practice. One is the concentration stream, and the other is the insight stream. So mental noting is a very strongly insight type of practice, and so if you do concentration, you end up in places like the jhanas. You end up in nice, stable, permeating stillnesses. And if you do insight, you end up in unstable, like in the disillusion of reality, in the sequence of the stages of insight. There's about 16 in the sequence. It was written a couple thousand years ago in meditative theory, and it's still applicable today. You can do a bunch of mental noting, and you find yourself transitioning through mind, body, cause and effect, arising and passing, disillusion, fear, misery, disgust, desire for deliverance. There's like a very particular journey where reality, at least for as you're occupying that moment, may feel just like everything is miserable, right? Like misery. And then there's the shift after that is everything is disgusting. Like I just don't like this. And it's this quality that is like all you're doing is mental noting, right? You're like, I see that. But then like your mind will wander off and be like, I really don't like my room. Like I am disgusted about like my room is is kind of disgusting in here, you know, and to an inexperienced meditator, that's like these stages can be kind of ungrounding. To an experienced person, you're like, I must be in disgust because I hate my room in this moment. And then the next moment after, it's like the disgust moves on, and you know, disgust goes to desire for deliverance. And so there's the quality of like, I don't want to be in this room anymore, right?
Somebody save me.
Somebody say, yeah, get me out of here, right? Which is different to the moment before, which is fundamentally a different state on this a different stage in the stages of insight.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like you do talk about the distractions and stuff. And like to me, it's like at first I'm like, oh, it's so hard to meditate because I'm distracted. But like after a while, I'm like, no, these distractions are like my mind opening up and like letting other stimulus in and not. And so it's just more like just trying to experience all the things that are happening to me.
Right. So how you go, like we had an episode about 10 episodes ago where you were like cycling and we were playing with it on live. Like, where are you up to with that?
What, the insight?
Yeah. Are you still cycling every couple of weeks, or are you like stable now, or are you?
I'll be honest, like a lot of times I see like I'll see the stuff like cycling, and like I'm like I'll get stuck somewhere and I'm like, okay, like instead of panicking, like responding externally, I'm like, okay, like I'm just stuck here. Like I don't know what to do. But the problem is because if the insight cycle doesn't go through, then I don't always realize what's happening.
Yeah, there's a inside cycle.
If it goes through, I don't need to know what happened because it worked.
Right. It's got this I have the classic thing of like, it's been a long day. I've been like bashing my head against everything I've been trying to do all day. And then like 5 p.m. comes around. I'm like, oh, I've been in something, right? I've been in a meditative state. I've been in a like I've tied in a knot or something, and I've been in it all. Like I've been in a low valence state, but I've been caught in it, right? All day, and it's like it took me all day to even notice, right?
Yeah, that's like when I start to wake up from it is when I like often I'll get to a point like where I'm like doing the thing and I'm like, okay, nothing is working. There's nothing I can do. And like I kind of just like just give up and like just stop, right? Which is, like essentially just meditating. Like you're just stopping and like watching what's happening, and then maybe like doing like kind of like the bare minimum of survival.
Right. I suspect that one of the big keys here is the giving up, which is maybe as also translated like surrendering. So if I'm having a miserable day, stop trying to pretend I'm not. Stop trying to fight.
Stop trying to make it not miserable.
Right.
It's just like stop pretending it's not, and stop trying to make it not miserable. It's already miserable. Just accept that.
Right.
And you're living in this miserable day, and like just you do the best you can.
Right. There's some quality of There's a quote from Trungpa. Someone asked him. Chongring Trungpa was an American meditator. He's sort of like the father of. He taught Ram Dass, and he taught Jack Cornfield, he taught like Pema Chandran, he taught all the like Reggie Ray, all the greats. But someone asked him, what do you do if you find yourself in hell? Like if you're moving through the realms and you're meditating, what do you do if you find yourself in hell? And he said, I try and stay there.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're miserable?
I think like there's context in which that advice is going to like hit in a good way, but I think like just generically that advice is
terrifying. It's the worst advice. Have you tried being more sad? Like no.
It is terrifying. It is terrifying, but that's not the thing I'm pushing back against. It's the hell is like people will make their own hell. They'll be like, oh, I'll stay here, so I'll just like make my own hell. Like no, don't make your own hell. Just just even like the increment, or just like trying to do whatever you can do. But I kind of want to jump.
Go ahead, jump.
We got a lot of comments on the videos that we have been addressing. You knew the whole time and you didn't do anything?
I mean, I got the controller in me. I can see the
what the hell? Oh, yeah. No, we
gotta work out how to interact better.
Because we're trying to build our audience. We gotta interact with them or they're gonna leave.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I use hemp, I see the shape of consciousness. Often they're 2D rings, so they seem like they can be 3D skins. That's interesting, but hemp, I think it means weird.
There's something weird about a lot of meditative experiences seem to appear in 2 dimensions. I had this one moment where I was meditating and I was
if
like,
you close one eye, everything is 2 dimensions, right?
I was meditating and I was like with my eyes closed, seeing the like white dots, right? And I was seeing it as like a flat surface, and I suddenly had this moment of like, oh yes, the planets are all like painted on a piece of paper. And then I was like, wait a second, no, they're not. They're actually 3 dimensions. And then I had everything kind of went whoomp or something. And I don't know what happened or what changed, but some like deep model of the shape of reality in my head changed from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. And I was like, oh, I don't know what that was. I've never had anything like it since. I have no idea what it was, but it was fascinating at the time.
That's so cool.
So there's some sort of, I think maybe we have like a cached response of seeing reality at 2D, and then maybe sometimes we can shift the cache to a 3-dimensional perceptual construct. I don't really know what it was.
Yeah, well, a 2D is simpler, right?
Right. Well, 2D is a maybe for a little kid, 2D is just way easier to handle.
Well, for everyone, 2D is way easier to handle.
But of course, we do have a 3D realm in which we traverse all the time.
Right, but we don't. I think most of the space we occupy is more or less 2 dimensions, right? Like you're only really going right or left. Like you're not going up and down.
Right. The dimensions on the surface of the sphere of the Earth, right? That we've got like directionality, but we really don't go that much up or down.
Yeah, when I describe stuff, I usually like there's maybe like a couple factors that go on, like high ceilings or low ceilings, and like that's it. Everything else is 2 dimensions.
I must say also
it's usually even smaller.
Our eyes sort of stay at the like eye height, right?
Not
often that our eyes are where our feet are. So like our visual, the point at which we like peer upon the world doesn't like occupy feet land and then walk around on, like, imagine your eyes like doing the like when your feet walk, right, stepping like this,
right even
very like destabilizing.
Yeah, like your eyes do like when you walk, you're actually like, you've ever seen a camera when someone holding a camera while they walk, it's like very jostly, but that's not your experience when you're walking, because you have all these systems to be like, no, we're not.
You have the like you and the world, and like you walk and then the world moves with you, so that like
it's just
if you like duck, then you're like the
everything
world
cancels out.
Right. It's fascinating.
Everything cancels out and you're just straight.
Fascinating how much our brains are doing to keep it stable. There is actually a fun exercise here. You can go for a run, and I think running is important because you need to be kind of moving fast enough. Go to a park, go for a run, and one perspective is like the park is stationary and I like run through the park. And another perspective is like I am stationary and then the park runs, like as I like flail my legs, the park moves towards me. And there's running, I think because we're moving fast enough, we can do it with running. You can do it with a car as well. Like I am driving through the world in the car, like I'm driving through, or my car is stationary and the world is whooshing past me, sort of whoosh. Like playing with that perspective can be really powerful for like de-anchoring. Like we have this habitual anchor where we stick to one or the other, but it's sort of like thinking of the world as a video game almost. Like in video games, we might have like a third-person camera following behind the player's shoulder and the character's shoulder, and the character like walks through the world. Like you can do that one as you run as well. You can try and like imagine being that stationary camera, like following the character.
Like you're on a treadmill,
right? But so normally,
and I like that perspective because it puts you as the main character in your own story.
Right.
I think some people forget that they are.
Right. Well, normally when I travel through the world, I'm the like first-person-y character that like. In fact, the world is stationary, and I walk through the world interacting with my kitchen, like walking over there to my bedroom. Like the world is stationary, and I like travel through it. But then when I go to like, when I switch to this other one, I am stationary, and I operate by moving the bathroom towards me. Like I flail my limbs, and then the bathroom moves towards me, but I am a stationary object. Is like it unlocks something of an attachment to reality or the shape of reality that makes it more free, makes it more malleable. And interestingly, if we're a stationary point in the center, the rest of everything can be symmetrical around us. Or whereas if we're traveling through the world and the world is quite complicated, we can't build symmetry because the whole world is very complicated. Right? There's no symmetry in the complexity. But if we're in the center, everything coming out from the center is more likely to occupy symmetrical states. There's at least symmetry of meaning making. But like
we're in the center, everything else is more likely to be symmetry.
So imagine, let me try and say this differently. Imagine, so we have the layout of my house, right? And my house is not very symmetrical. It's got all sorts of walls and couches and stuff in it, right? And we're seeing the layout of my house from like above my house looking down. It's not very symmetrical, right? But if I move all of my experience to where I am, and then I view the layout of my house out of the one perspective, like in 3 dimensions, in every direction, there is like around me is my house.
Oh, I see.
It's like the point focus with the like surround.
Yeah, this is reminding me of what Layman said, where because when he was talking about the shape of experience, Layman was also talked about this, and he said that it was, I forgot the word, but it's like that 3D donut shape, toroidal.
Toroidal, yeah.
Toroidal.
Yep. This was Layman Pascal about 5 episodes ago.
Yeah, that was a good one too. If you guys like this episode, you should watch that one too. And he's talking about it being toroidal, and like that's kind of what you're saying, where like the things on the edges lose salience, or like that salience gets spread out much more.
Right.
The things closest to you are, and so everything, like the shape of everything has that shape.
Well, like if reality is everything outside of the point that is me, that's a way to sort of view it in a sphere.
Like the map itself, the map is symmetrical, even if the things on them aren't.
Right. So if we're like, how do I strategically find new ways of seeing the world, new maps, new meditative methods that help me feel more symmetrical? Well, this is one. I'm the point in the middle, and then everything around me is like around me. Very egocentric, but like if it feels more symmetrical, I'm winning. This is there's the headless way.
Or you're stuck in a bubble.
Or I'm stuck in a bubble,
Yeah.
right? So there's some downsides to being stuck in a bubble, that like the bubble still feels kind of self-contained, and there's no such thing as entry or exit from the bubble.
Yeah, let's do some more comments.
All right.
Okay, so he sees them 2D and they seem like they can be 3D skins. 2D rings would imply, no, I guess that's fine. I don't know what he means by they seem like that. IRC, the temporal cortex may be storing long-term memory, and the insula does stuff like this. Salience control. Possible hypothesis is because efficiently storing long-term memory renders the intrinsic harmonies of your brain, the coupling of the region that is recorded, that the region doing salience control during the seizures result. What the?
Right. This is incredible.
Yeah. So he's saying, let me see if I got this. So
part of our brain does salience.
Temporal cortex, which is I think on the side here, like your temples. So that does long-term memory, and the insula, I don't know where that is, does stuff like salience control.
I'm gonna do a quick one of these.
Is that because the
There you go. We've got an insula sort of there in the brain.
Is the insula near the temporal cortex?
Let's see where the temporal cortex. Temporal.
It's kind of close to it.
The temporal lobe is kind of outside the insula.
Yeah. So the insula is the middle, so that would be that makes sense for salience. He's saying that the insula, and I don't know this. Neurology is hard for me. So the insula, like the insula is the middle, in the middle. So that's, if that, like, that's not taking, that's not necessarily the seat of your consciousness, but then he's saying if that does salience control, then that's like determining how important something is, essentially. How important an experience is. Efficiently storing long-term memory requires rendering the intrinsic harmonics of your brain. Yeah, because if you're remembering something, like, you kind of have to remember what you were, right? Because you change over time as well. And I think there is something, like, a lot of times people, when they remember stuff, they fill in the gaps with the things that are the way things are now. And like, that's, I guess you're just like, when you're coming up with the memories, your brain is harmonizing, is rendering the intrinsic harmonizations, and so anything that didn't get stored is getting recreated now. And so that's why, like, you can take your memories by, like, by remembering them, like, in different contexts. Sixth sense stores. I don't understand any of this stuff. Why didn't you say anything at the beginning when they came up? This is probably, like, okay, so these are things, right? Like, if you were looking at this conversation as a memory of what's happened, then we're missing all the context. You know what? I think this is it. I think I'm kind of done this episode. How about you?
Right.
Anything else you want to say?
I still want to know how to practice, how to, like, I mean, shortcut is take drugs. I'm not into that so much. Like, how do we actually engage, maybe from the meditative or the, I mean, my interest is the practitioner perspective and also the therapeutic container perspective. How do we practice in such a way that is supportive and transformative and brings about people living their best lives? Psychotechnologies Live!